thank you. Hopefully you can hear me well. Okay. I'm low voice. I've been in Sicily for 10 days under 43 degrees and massive air conditioning. So I'm a little bit low voice today. So it's my pleasure to be here, and I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me, and all the organizations of this school. And today, these first two lectures this morning are quite interrelated. As Francesco Ancini is one of the Behave Lab teams at the University of Milan, and so we have, conjectured a little bit of interaction or links between our lectures. So he will deepen more on certain specific details about an example of agent-based models. I will give you more an introductory overview of agent-based modeling, as I guess that probably not many of you are familiar with agent-based modeling. Am I right? Who knows agent-based modeling? Oh, my friend, couple of friends. So yeah, so good. And first of all, before entering into the formal lectures, I would like to just inform you that this type of research is typical, or well, not only, but typical of our research team. I've moved to University of Milan 5 years ago, and to establish a new lab, a new group, which is called a Behave Lab. And we have a physical lab, so we do experiments in the lab. But we also do computational research, and specifically agent-based models and social networks, integration between networks and agent-based models. And we regularly organize a summer school on agent-based modeling, and the next edition is this September, from 11 to 20 September. We have a first week introductory and a second week advanced, in which we explore the use of statistical models for estimating model parameters and for validating simulation outputs. There are still some places for attending the school online, so it's an hybrid event. You can attend it online or on-site. So this is the link in case you're interested to stay around in Italy until September, or come back in Italy in September for the training on this type of thing, okay? Good. What are my goals today? My goal is to convince you that agent-based modeling is an important tool for doing computational social science research first. And I will briefly recap a little bit on the origins of agent-based modeling. I look very young, I know, but I started to do this type of things in the end of 90s. And I remember well that in the 90s, computational social science was meaning agent-based modeling. So before the revolution of big data, so computation, the meaning of computation, so basically using computers to do something, was really connected to the concept of simulation. So it was computer simulation was computational social science. Then something happened, as you might know, and so agent-based modeling was just a part of a larger type of, very multi-method type of research, which is now called computational social science. So my point would be to locate, position the role of agent-based modeling within the larger umbrella of the computational social science methods. Second, I will show you 3 examples of research using agent-based models to do something that, in my opinion, other methods within the computational social science can't, such as exploring multiple macro-generative paths of social dynamics, exploring different type of micro-foundations, behavioral mechanisms that can account for what we observe at the microscopic level of our society, perform counterfactual tests, perform what-if scenarios, so what can happen if. So using simulation to perform counterfactual tests or what-if scenario analysis, and using computation for understanding contexts in which data are missing, or we don't have any data at all. So that's my point. And finally, I hope to being able to suggest you ways to try to incorporate agent business models into other type of research, link agent business model with other type of methods to try to, in my opinion, use understanding what are the micro foundations. So what are micro mechanisms, the behavioral mechanisms that can be responsible for what we observe in our meso or macro level type of observations. So that's the point. You can interrupt me whenever you want. Okay. So first, everybody here probably knows this manifesto. There has been many manifestos of computational social science, but this one was really path-breaking, right? Not only because published in Science, not only for the authority of the authors, so large-scale collaboration of many people, outstanding people in the field, but also for the type of, for the type of manifesto, for the vision that that manifesto was trying to channel or to football or to sell. And in that manifesto, the focus was mostly on using computation to try to extrapolate patterns in very large-scale type of data, to use advanced type of computational methods to try to dig into large-scale patterns of data and extrapolate certain type of regularities or patterns that can't be established or predicted by theory, but that are there. So within those type of data, there is the secret of the knowledge. And we have only to discover and explore those type of world of data to try to extrapolate something very interesting. So it was mostly the idea that computational social science was revolutionary in a way that we had incredible data that we could even probably not imagine before. And now we have to look at those data and try to understand what is going on in those kind of data. So it was like a telescope type of idea, right? Mostly, although also in some specific part of our manifesto, there is still an emphasis on the importance of hypothesis, theory, so the microscope. So that's it. In my opinion, the telescope and the microscope have to work together. So, and what is today will be very much microscopic. So try to, and very much, we are not positivistic, but very much old school, starting with certain hypotheses, and then try to test those hypotheses into models. So that's it. So we need to combine these two things. So that's one of the points. But the role of agent-based modeling in that manifesto was really, really marginal compared to other type of methods, right? Indeed, it's at the beginning it's a little bit confrontational, and I will try to provide a synthesis of it. And indeed, if you look at the recent call by the European Commission on the Horizon Europe, there is a call now, probably still not open, but open in October, if I remember well. The call is really the past, present, and future of democracies. And there is a specific call for computational social scientists. And they are calling projects, proposals to try to investigate various aspects of democracy using computational social science methods. And there is a footnote inside a call, which is this one, in which the meaning of computational social science is specified, is clarified. And look at this kind of meaning. So for this European Horizon Europe call, the meaning of computational social science is the use of statistical physics methods applied to social data. 2 points. Methods coming from statistical physics, first. And second point, the social aspect is about the data. So there are 2 meanings here that I would like to discuss with you today. So first, computational social science is not something important for statistical physics within social science. So it's not an import of methods developed outside social sciences within social science. That's at the origin in the 90s. agent-based modeling and other computational type of methods were developed by social scientists themselves. So social scientists were, since from the beginning, involved in the development of those type of methods. It's not something that has to be imported from outside. First point. And the second point, the social is not only in the data. The social is also in a way, in the hypothesis that we have to start from about how people behave, how people interact. And that's very much social science specifics, right? So that's the point. And indeed, what I'm talking about is about agent-based models. So this slide is very much introductory. As what are this agent-based models? So there are these terms, agent, right? Well, we know what agents are, right? Agents are entities acting, behaving, doing something, right? So, and the point is that we need to, the idea is to use the power of computation to try to understand, to formalize models about agent behavior. And indeed, this is what we do since from the beginning of the agent-based modeling venture, which is relatively new, right? First type of agent-based model was mid of 90s. As human beings is all times, in terms of scientific patterns, it's yesterday, right? So it's relatively new type of kind of method. And what we typically do is to create, to formalize models using computational languages to formalize modeling, which we start to assume a population of agents, typically heterogeneous in certain properties, which can be informed by data or reflect some theoretical hypothesis. And we use the power of simulation to make those agents interact, to observe what is going on at the microscopic level of the world system. So that's it. And we experiment by changing assumption, changing parameters, changing initial condition, and observing what is going on at the microscopic level when agents interactively execute those type of rules of behavior that we inform, that we use for that. And then those agents are interacting with each other in a certain specific type of context. It could be some spatial neighbors, some social structure. And so there's also this kind of components of the social structure in the models. They move across space, they share information in networks. So we have everything of this in our model. And we use simulation to try to understand which are the implications of those behavior and those interactions for the emergent properties at the microscopic scale of the world system, which we observe by executing those kind of models in our type of computer, right? And obviously, these are very good in the sense that we might have very much heterogeneous agents with very much heterogeneous properties, different type of resources, different age, different attributes, very much heterogeneous, right? We might have very rich type of structural interaction between them. We might have a lot of nonlinearity going on and stochasticity going on, so agents can adapt to the behavior of others, not all the system-specific others locally or more globally. So basically, we have everything we need into the same compact model. So that's it. And obviously, what we want to observe is what is going on at the microscopic level with large time scale or space scales that we want to observe. And the logic, the method is that what we want to do is not to extrapolate patterns in data, but what we want to do is to grow, to reconstruct, rebuild, regrow, generate some collective patterns that we want to explain. So behavior correction equal dynamics, but those dynamics are very much dynamic. So there's a lot of feedback between the microscopic level and the macroscopic level and vice versa, which could be very much capturing these models. For those of you who are sociologists or social scientists by background, this is one of the things that when I fell in love with the agent-based model was the idea that, okay, now I can try to solve the famous problem of the macro-macro type of links. How much, the macro level, what we observe at the societal level is produced, generated by countless type of interaction between heterogeneous agents, try to pursue different kind of goals and different interests. And so it's a very much compact type of ways to summarize a world society into just one model, right? So that's it. Okay, so this is the origin of this type of method, right? In the 90s, so this is this is the context, right? Probably not very much familiar with you, but it's extremely familiar. And I remember the Pulp Fiction type of Spice Girls and floppy disk and the first type of laptops. So this is the world in which the first agent-based models were developed, published, used. So this is, looks to you probably medieval age, but it's really yesterday in terms of scientific type of landscape, right? The first, I will give you just a brief recap on the origin. So the first type of agent-based models were, there is, for those of you who are a fan of this type of thing, there is pretty much a kind of, not divine, but two types of trajectories of the origin of computational social science, which is one in the US and one in Europe. And in the US, the computational social science origins are very much linked with the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico, which has been the mecca for all the fan of complex adaptive system theory. So it was really, the ADM was really the method for putting the theoretical program of computational, of complex adaptive system theory into practice. And indeed, the first tool for running and designing and running agent-based models were developed within the Santa Fe Institute. And it was this very much still alive. There was still a festival, if I remember still, a festival Swarm, and Santa Fe Institute still organized it regularly for fan of aficionados of the type of thing. But the tool was Swarm. It was developed, this is the origin, so this is the working paper launching Swarm. Heartbreaking type of thing. And this is the abstract of the working paper presenting Swarm as a tool for running, designing simulation, agent-based simulation. And the idea was a collaboration between computer scientists, social scientists, biologists, to try to have a tool which was designed to help non-programmers, non-computer scientists, not people starting from scratch, writing codes and programming everything, to help them to do this kind of job. So to formalize models of agent interaction, right? And so this is the origin. So the idea was to, problem of these people was to, okay, we have very much complex aggregate dynamics, very much nonlinear, very much complex, right? We observe a lot of self-organization patterns in those type of dynamics, but we want to dig into the microscopic level of the generating mechanism. So we want to understand how much a population of agents, heterogeneous agents, interacting in complex type of, under constraints in complex type of structure, give rise to these complex emergent properties that we want to observe. And so this was the idea. From first application of distributed intelligence robotics to the first applications of agent-based modeling on financial markets. They shared the same type of grammars, the same type of theory, the same type of problems, which was exactly split emergent properties from local interaction between heterogeneous agents. And ADM was at the core of this type of thing. So this is the father, but we also have a mother, obviously. And this was Sugarscape in the same years in which at the Santa Fe Institute they were developing Swarm, which was really a set of libraries in Java and C, set of libraries to help people, which are, by the way, if you go like this, it was needed a little bit to be a nerd, even only to download Swarm and to make it running in your computer. I remember the first time it was really a nightmare. And but it was designed to help, still requiring a lot of skills today. And at the same time, there was these two people, Joshua Epstein and Robert Axtell. Actually more public health, epidemiology, but really a social scientist to the bone. Robert Axtell, an economist. So they were developing Sugarscape, which was like Swarm, but a little bit different. And they launched this kind of Sugarscape in this famous path-breaking book published by the MIT Press entitled A Growing Artificial Society, which was the idea to explain microscopic level from the bottom up. Try to understand the generating mechanism, the microscopic level that can explain what we observe at the macroscopic level. So this was really much, it was different. Swarm was really a tool for making possible to simulate complex interaction between heterogeneous agents. This was the idea, to synthesize a world society into a model. So in the sugar scale, there were a population of agents born, dying, so there was demography, issue population and demography aspects. And there was reproduction. So there was resources, there were inequality of resources, so agents needed resources to perform their type of activities. There were space, social environments, so there was everything within the same model. And so what was the idea to, and it was completely theoretical. So it was really completely theoretical, right? At that time, there were no data for measuring behavior of individuals at the large scale that we have today. It was really a kind of artificial experiments. It was a kind of experimental method instead of using lab to understand behavior of people, and we were using the computer to experiment with this type of thing. What happens if agents behave in that kind of way? What happens at a microscopic scale? That was the idea. It was an experimental method, but using artificial lab like the computer, right? At the same time in EU, and these are really mid of 90s, at the same time in EU, a community of people were using the same type of, not Sugarscape, not Swarm, other type of tools. But the interesting things about the difference between US and in US, there were really much complex adaptive system driven type of, use of ADF, right? It was linked to the ambition. I know we can discuss about that this ambition was failing, that failed, or is still alive. The ambition was to rewrite the grammar of the science, try unifying principles of complexity in all different type of example or instances of complex adaptive system, from financial markets to ant societies, same type of things, same type of mechanisms, same type of, the idea was to unify, using complexity to unify the grammar of science across all the scales. It was very much ambitious. Still around, right? Still around, but very much ambitious. And in Europe it was really different. The first agent business model were used by social scientists themselves, or cognitive scientists, social scientists, behavioral scientists themselves, to solve theoretical challenges in their own field and domains. It was not the idea to rewrite fine unifying principles. It was, for instance, the idea of sociologists to try to solve the macro problems, the agency structure type of problems. It was a problem of economists to relax the draconian assumptions about perfect rationality of markets, or for trying to understand what happens if prices are established locally. There's no big coordinator or Walrasian type of coordinator of the market, cleaning at the end of the day everything and do the job. No, prices are emerging locally by direct signals and interaction between producer and customers. What happens if, instead of having one type of rationality, one type of fits-all type of idea of rationality, agents in the market are heterogeneous in terms of rules, behavior, heuristics? What about if they are not far-sight strategic agents, but they use heuristics, so they are past-driven, they're looking back, right? Backward type of rationality. What if they are random? What if they are crazy? What if they are not rational, as if assumed by the standard economic theory? So very much specific type of thing. Or such a cognitive scientist, we're using agent business model to understand what happens if norms feed back into the mind of the agents. What are the implications of all this? So it was really much using the same type of methods, tools, broadly speaking, different type of maybe specific type of tools, but for doing completely different type of challenges, right? Solve problems of their own type of domains. It was more collective than, it was not centralized, it was not a Santa, there has never been a Santa Fe Institute-like type of things in Europe. It was really much emerging from different types of centers. It was very much more decentralized, distributed than in the US. So these are the middle 90s. And I would like to, so I'm one of the few having this picture, by the way. So this is a scanned version of a picture that I gave from Ryan Examo. So this is the foundational events in Europe, Cortona, Italy, by the way, nice place. In the 97, in this room, there were all these people doing ABM from the US and Europe, concentrated in the same type of events, and launching this kind of challenge of using agent-based modeling. This is Robert Axelrod, for instance. And so this was a very, so we are in that era. We are in that period, right? Medieval age, probably for you. Now we are here. Now we are here. So we were here. Your agents, now we are here. And the evolution of ABM has been quite, tremendous in a way. As all fields which are dominated by research technology develops, and so it changes the way we are doing. Instead, for instance, if I want to summarize, I'll give you some example of parallel histories of this flow. The problem now here is if this sugarscapes were a type of thing that the origin were really theoretical abstract models about the society, tried to play with this kind of artificial experimental methods of the ABM to try to understand what was going on. It was really much very theoretical, right? Now, I mean, if you look at the ABM papers, are very much empirical. So now what we typically do is to try to integrate data with the models, to use ABM to try to understand, to estimate parameters, to try to understand what is going on, but not only theoretically speaking, but in very much concrete empirical kind of instances and examples. And for instance, if you get back to the first publications of the ABM, in the whole computational social science period here, dominated by ABM, you find typically that's this kind of publication where plotting an average running simulation multiple times, plotting average, and it was very much qualitative, right? It was just plotting dynamics, discussing these dynamics without using really much strong statistical tests or sensitivity parameters tests on the initial condition. It was really much qualitative. Now it's strongly quantitative. So now we are trying to develop statistical methods and tools to try to estimate the patterns developed by our simulations. It's very much standardized. At the beginning, everyone was doing their own kind of models with their own type of tools. Now we have very much strong standardizations procedures in how for model building and model testing and model reusing and model replications. So we have very much sophisticated type of tools. So as typically we start very much craftsman type of thing, everyone doing his own type of models and publishing more qualitative results of simulation. Now the ABM literature is really much dominated by standardizations. And there is a link now not only between statistic methods, although we still don't have a very strong nonlinear econometrics type of method to estimate really complex type of nonlinear type of outcomes like what generated by ABM. But for instance, we also now see some examples of using machine learning or Bayesian statistic models to try to estimate and calibrate our models. So there has been a lot going on here that I can't really summarize in a single lecture, but that's basically the picture. And if this is the general picture, just 3 snapshots of parallel stories to show you how much ABM was really used in different fields for different types of purposes. So this is the economics, for instance. ABM is very much now popular among economists. And you know that economists, how many economists here? Oh, well, so good job. So you know very much that economists have a very well-established type of theoretical paradigms, I call it, or a theoretical problem. Dynamic stochastic equilibrium models, type of thing, right? And there is a different type of sub-communities contesting that model for a given number of reasons. Behavioral economists are contesting the assumptions of the models, the fact that people are not rational as predicted by the economic theory. And so there's a stream of behavioral experiments showing biases, heuristics type of reasoning of agents, and this type of thing, right? So they are not contesting this kind of model. There are branches of economists using ABM, sometimes even connecting experiments with ABM to relax these 2 or 3 very much controversial hypotheses about the market efficient hypothesis, right? Perfect rationality of agents, that's that kind of thing. No local interaction, no complex local interaction between agents. Right? problems about out of equilibrium dynamics that we observe in the empirical patterns that can't be explained by the standard models. So the standard models can't explain empirical patterns that we observe in markets, in many markets. And so they are using ABM to try to relax those type of building blocks of the conventional model to show that if we relax those type of assumptions, we can approximate, generate the same type of empirical regularities that we observe in empirical data. And for instance, this is a very nice book. These guys were using ABM. But by the way, the side of things were people using ABM in financial markets making a lot of money. So predicting, making tons of money. Don Farmer, for instance, was a guy inventing a society with 2 or 3 ABM people. They made tons of money predicting markets by using those type of models, in which they were assuming that economic agents had zero intelligence. They were completely random. They invested randomly, and they made a lot of money, tons of money. Put into practice those models and making money, right? So this is an example of this work about the financial market simulation of the Santa Fe Institute teams, in which they were showing that, there are different type of ways of investing, and particularly, we don't need to have an hyper-rational type of individuals or economic agents to have perfect efficiency at the microscopic level. Perfect efficiency at the microscopic level can be reached by assuming that people are completely crazy, behaving randomly and get zero intelligence, forgetting everything, and behaving and investing like a random type of thing, right? So very nice stories of challenging the convention, right? So these are people studying cooperation, game theory people, right? People studying cooperation dilemma. How much strategic individuals in certain type of context can end up being trapped in suboptimal or dysfunctional type of equilibrium. So cooperation dilemmas, right? And for these people, ABM was a tool for extending the lab. So behavioral game theorists are bringing game theory, which is still a very much abstract type of theory, relaxing, same kind of like, by the way, there's a very strong link between game theory and economics, obviously. Same kind of thing. They were relaxing a little bit, some assumption, and they were trying to understand how people really concretely, empirically behave, instead of predicting how people should behave, observing how people really behave, a certain type of interaction context that we're artificially reproducing in the lab, right? What is the problem of these people? The problem of these people that's, with the lab experiments, we have a bunch of people, bunch of individuals being challenged by some strategic games, and you can extrapolate from there of the observation of their behavior, some patterns of behavior, right? But the problem is that you can't keep people in the lab for 20 years. 45 minutes, then people start to balk, and so it's small scale. You can have millions of people in the lab. So small scale, just strong constraints in terms of time and space, and you can't really understand if those type of strategies are evolutionarily stable. They can reproduce themselves across generation. And so they were using ABM to add some evolutionary type of components to what they observed in the lab. So it was an extension of the ABM used to extend and solve certain kinds of constraints that the lab has for studying human cooperation. So another example. And to the, how many sociologists like me around here? So you said economist, sociologist. That's typical, right? I know the problem. Anyway, so for sociologists using ABM like me, this again was a really fantastic. It was hey, finally, we have a formalized method to formalize models, right? Description, providing very much descriptive analysis of the reality is fantastic, but we don't want to explain. So we want to understand causal mechanisms behind the reality, and which are probably you can use quantitative type of things, adding controls, adding variables, making regression, this kind of stuff. But these are very much abstract, very much macro, right? We don't have the individuals there. We don't have the agency. We don't have the heterogeneity of agency. Now finally we have that. And so for instance, this is a fantastic path-breaking review published in the Annual Review of Sociology, one of the most prestigious journals in our field. And Michael Macy and Robert Miller was publishing in 2002 this review launching, providing the state of the art of the use of agent-based model in sociology. And they were using this very nice title, from factors to actors, from the variable quantitative-based sociology to actors. So now we finally have formalized a tool to understand how people behave and which are the consequences of behavior for the microscopic level. So again, same tool, same framework, same method, used for different type of purposes, right? Okay, so this is what's then we come to examples, right? This is what typically is the beauty, in my opinion, about the ADMs, right? That it's a compact, so it's a data generating mechanism. We don't need any data, we generate data first. Does not depend on data. It is a data generating tool. Those data are generated by our simulations, or Excel files, CSS files of our simulation, right? And this is the beauty of it. You don't need anything. You have everything, right? You can reconstruct the whole social world in your computer. And you have data. You make hypotheses, you run an executive model, and the simulation generates your data. And then you test, you run regression, you run statistical tests on the data that your simulation has generated. And you can easily, unlike the experimental research in which you have to come back to the lab, rerun the experiments, having people and filling ethical guidelines and ethics committee, and go back and test if a small modification of your design can affect the collective outcomes of your agents or your individuals. You can go back, just clicking, restarting, rerunning, go back. So it's very much convenient. It's very much easy. You don't need anything, right? And so by going back, rerunning the same type of models or slightly variation of the model, let's assume that people behave in a certain way, running, let's assume that they behave in another way, running a simulation of observing outcomes. And it's very much convenient to study the influence of initial conditions on final outcomes, which is the obsessions of many of agent-based models. At some point, there's a T0 in your model that there is no in the reality. Where is the T0 in the reality? Difficult. Sometimes we have path-breaking events, COVID, pandemics. Okay, we have time 0. So we have like a rapture, it's like an experimental procedure, pre-post, like in experiment. But in many cases, there's no pre-post. So these kind of initial conditions, so the fact that you assume certain type of, you parameterize your model with certain type of values might have consequences. So your outcome can be dependent on your assumption and initial conditions. So you need to purge this or to understand the implication of this initial condition. That's very fantastic with these models. It's very fantastic. Right? And you might change, obviously, conditions. And this is why I'm one of those guys believing that ABMs are very much experimental type of things and just surrogates of experiments. Why? Because you can use the same type of experimental logic or randomized trial controls with ABM. With randomized trial controls, you have a set of participants, individuals, randomized in different kind of groups and exposed to different type of stimuli, right? You have a control group, exposed to placebo, and a treated group exposed to a stimulus, right? The drug or the treatment, whatever. And you want to compare these kind of differences at the microscopic level, the group level, by this kind of stimulus, assuming that people are responding to that stimulus, right? Same kind of way, you have a population of agents. Your agents are not individuals, are your agents in your models. It can be 10, 100, 1,000, hundreds, thousands, millions. You can scale up, whatever agents you want. And then can encapsulate whatever heterogeneity you want. It can be different, one by one, in principle, right? So they match very much heterogeneous. You run baseline conditions, you run a very simple type of run of your model. For instance, a scenario in which people are behaving randomly. They're randomly behaving, like that. And then you start creating scenarios in which you rerun the same simulation by just modifying, like in the stimulus type of thing. You treat the same population of agents with different type of conditions. You modify, and you can compare differences in your output. So this is the logic that dominates, in my opinion. It's one of the logics that is more dominant for agent-based model makers. is using nature as a model as a surrogate of experimental methods. And this gives you a logic which is very much convenient to use, right? Okay, I'll give you now 3 examples, otherwise I can kill the audience. 3 examples, concrete examples of this kind of thing. 3 examples. One, for our own research. It's nice to talk about our own experience instead of. So 3 papers, basically. And in the first paper, we use AVI to calibrate it on experimental data. So we run an experiment. The paper was published ages ago in social networks. So we first run, we get data from, we have individual observations of the same individual across a given number of rounds of where they were playing a strategic game. They were playing an investment game, repeated version. Couples were randomly shuffled in the lab session. They had money, they were playing with real money. And the challenge of the strategic interaction was they were playing 2 roles, which were rotating throughout the experiments. They were playing as an investor, as a trustees. The rule of games are very simple. There's a stylized type of strategic interaction, very dominant in game theory. So the idea is that I pick up, for instance, this is the experimental group. I randomly pick up 2 of you. I match these 2 people. I give you 10 euros to one person, one of these 2. And I ask to that person how much he or she wants to invest of these 10 euros from 0 to 10, knowing that any amount will be tripled before being sent to the counterpart, the trustees. So there's a triple, there's a possible investment. You have 10 euros can become 30 euros if you invest everything. But then this kind of investment are given to the trustees, and the trustees can decide whether or not to keep all this investment in his or her pocket, or reciprocating by sending back something from 0 to all to the investor. But the investor doesn't know what the trustees will do. There's no information about the trustees' past behavior. So typically what's the conventional, so the national equilibrium of the game in game theory terms is that the investor keeps all the money for him or herself, this kind of 10 euros in the pocket, because he or she predicts to be cheated by the trustees. And so these 2 people loses the possibility of this kind of tripling rules or this kind of investment. So there is a potential wealth at the disposal of these 2 people. But to realize the potential wealth, the investor has to invest everything, expecting that there are some reciprocity, motivation by the trustees to reciprocate back something to the investor. So typically, the best possible outcome of this type of strategic interaction is that the investor invests everything. This everything is tripled, is sent to the trustees, and the trustees cut half by half what he or she receives. And in such a way, these 2 people end up with a 50% of growth of their type of endowment. This is fantastic. They both exploit the wealth, potential wealth, and they even establish a fair deal, a fair outcomes about the allocation of that same wealth. But this is conditional upon the fact that the investor decides to risk. So the plans of, and by the way, the investor is playing this as a first round with another person. In the second round, he or she played as a trustee for another investor and vice versa, right? But there's no information about what is going on. So information is private. There's no information about what's going on. So these people have to explore in a sequence and have to formulate expectations about others' behavior, have to risk, have to find a counterpart which is sensitive to reciprocity, so returns, in order to establish a good equilibrium. But there's a risk of fragility of that outcomes. And this only depends from the decision of the investor, right? Tons of replication of the same type of experiments across different populations, student samples, Western, non-Western, in the field, and so on. We know very much that unlike the prediction of the national equilibrium of the game, the national equilibrium is violated systematically by people. So people are investing on average 40% of their endowment on average. And people are returning slightly less, but approximating the 38% of what received. So this is the real equilibrium of the game. Obviously, if the game is repeated with finite time, so there's an end effect, so typically what happens in the cooperation games universally is that cooperation increases in the first round of experiments, stabilizes in the middle of the experiment, and then declines as soon as the game approximately last round. Because in the last round, there's no incentive for people to reciprocate, and people started to anticipate the defection of the counterpart by starting to defect previously. And so there is this kind of end effect of the last round that propagates back as soon as the game approximately ends. So we know very much how people behave in that kind of games, right? It's they violate. It's more they start to risk and learn what is going on by adapting to what happens, what really the other counterpart is doing, and then adapting the next decision to the experience. So that's what people are playing this game in that way, right? Not estimating the end effect, and then by propagating back, starting to defect by backward induction seen from the first round, which is what the theory prevents that they should do. And so what we did was to take this kind of data set from the experimental decision makers of our individuals and calibrate them out. Calibrate them out that exactly reproduce the same behavior of people, but modifying the initial conditions, right? The typical things about the lab is that by randomly shuffled couples in a small group, you are like embedding people in some random network. There's a random probability of being matched with anyone else in a group, right? And given that people are behaving consistently in those kind of games, what can happen if instead of being embedded in having a random probability of being matched with anyone else at a group level, they are embedded in certain type of network topologies. So we modify the initial condition in the model. Instead of coming back to the lab and rerun the same experiments with tons of codes and problems about the fact that even testing complex accuracy in the lab is sometimes obviously difficult. So we calibrated a model replicating the same behavior of individuals, and we vary the initial condition in the model instead of in the lab. And this was a trick, a kind of possible solution to set up. If by modifying the initial condition and the network topology in which people were playing this game, we are just modifying the probability of being matched from two people, basically. If by doing this we generate the same outcomes, it's like a sensitivity test using the model to perform a sensitivity test of initial condition in the lab. But more convenient, less costly, more convenient, easy. And so what we did was exactly that. And so, for instance, one thing was, okay, what can happen if, instead of playing a sequence of games just in one role, I'm casted to play as an investor of one of you, first round. We made this kind of interaction, then second round, I'm casted to play a trustee with someone else. This kind of thing. What happens if I play simultaneously in two roles? What happens if I multiply, same behavior, but I multiply, then the size of the interactions, I extend the scale. So I make people behaving like in the lab, but interacting for many, many, many more rounds with many, many more people, or having simultaneous interaction at the same time unit. So this is very easy to do in the lab, very difficult to do in the lab. And we run those kind of scenarios by manipulating those kind of conditions. And we compare the outcomes at the group level with the outcomes that we got in the lab. Use this kind of things to feed these two kind of series. But then we also add different type of speculation. What we want to, but not only to corroborate experimental findings. What can happen if? So we start to make what-if scenario, right? What can happen instead of people were just observing, understanding each other by a sequence of interaction, but they didn't know. We never gave them the chance to select the partner. So for instance, I casted to play as trustee, as investor, and you are my trustee. I invest a lot. I invest everything, and you get back half of the cake. So our multiply my investments, you ended up with a plus in your account pocket, and I ended up with a plus in my pocket. Very good deal, very good friend. What about the fact that instead of being asked to being shuffled, I keep my partner if I'm satisfied with it for her? So what about the fact that people could have some heuristics to try to not only explore the space of others' behavior, not to understand how much people are behaving, but also keeping memories about the previous partners and preferentially link with those partners with whom they had positive experience and forgetting, not willing to interact with people having bad experience. So we add pattern selection. So people were behaving like in the lab, but could spot other agents at memories and could develop rules and heuristics to try to preferentially interact with certain type of partner instead of others. Sorry. So, very much convenient, easy to do in a model. By the way, this is a regression line which tells you that there is a consistent pattern of behavior of people. So people investing more as investors were also those who are returning more as trustees. So that's typical. So two different roles. Investor has to do with risk propensity. Propensity to, okay, I can be cheated, but okay, that's the risk. So you know that risk propensity is a psychological construct, very important in economics and economic decisions, right? And the other one is not risk propensity. It wasn't sensitive to reciprocity. So this kind of people, these people could have decided to give me nothing. He or she deliberately risked to invest on me. He took a risk. Am I sensitive to reciprocate those risks by returning something or not? And these are completely different. This is reciprocity sensitivity. This is risk propensity. And the second one is sensitivity toward reciprocity, which are two different kind of psychological constructs. When people play these games, these two constructs are summarized in the same mind. So that's very much tolerant patterns, quite stable. So these are manipulations. So different scenarios. We start to replicate experimental life. We replicate the same type of experiments that we have, right? There's random coupling. There was one-way interactions. If I play as investor, I'm an investor. At the same time, I can't play with trustee as a trustee with someone else. And I can't play as investor with multiple partners, just one role in one time. Then we start to modify. We start to assume what happens if we randomly match people, but then the couples are fixed throughout the game. What happens if this? So that was the barring initial condition, right? What happens if people are embedded in some dense networks, or if they're embedded in some small networks, what about scale-free networks? So we vary this kind of initial topology, right? And then we assume that they could create link, so they could break up links. So no, I don't want to interact anymore with agent number 22. I interact with agent number 21, and I'm satisfied with him or her. I would like to interact also in the next round with the agent 21. If it's free, I can interact with him. We can give the people that, for instance, agent number 21 receives a request of interaction between multiple parties. They can play multiple games at the same time. So we start to create conditions in which the structure of interaction can be concentrated around some agents which attract more links and interact with many others, because people are willing to interact with these guys. And people can become isolated, not having anyone who wants to interact with them, and so no one enjoying anything, right? So people could become isolated if nobody's can want to interact with them. So there can be this kind of structure emerging throughout the game. So what we observed was that this is the comparison between the experiments and the model results in the baseline scenario. So we were fitting the same type of experimentalized scenario, which is our control group. We exactly replicated the same type of patterns that people were generating in the lab. But then we found that whenever we vary initial conditions in terms of topology, nothing happened. There was no statistically significant differences in terms of average cooperation in the game compared to the experiment. So the behavior of people consistently generated the same type of outcome regardless of varying the initial topology of interaction. So the topology of interaction didn't have any effect on the outcome. So that kind of game, if played with different type of network topology, should give the same type of outcome. So it was like a sensitivity test of initial condition. First point. But when we added the possibility of individuals, agents, to break links with people with whom they didn't want to interact, or to preferentially interact with the desired people, so we add this kind of dynamics of people selecting their partners, and so changing the structure of interaction, which was not overimposed anymore by the experimenters like in the game, but was emerging from the decision of people to create break links, so it was an emerging dynamic, we generate differences, we increase the level of cooperation compared to the experiments. And we increase the level of cooperation compared to the experiments by generating an emerging structure of concentration of links and nodes with the most cooperative agents. So the most cooperative agents, so those who are investing more and returning more, we're starting to collect desired interaction links with others who are willing to interact preferentially with them against others, and those ones starting cheating or not reciprocating as trustees in the game started to become isolated, started to become with no links and become isolated from the group. There was a concentration typically 20% of agents got 80% of links. So we generated an emerging social structure by changing the by adding partner selection rules in our models. And we generated differences compared to the lab. What I learned from this exercise. First, nice to use ABM to augment or extend the beauty of experiments. Experiments are beautiful, are a very much microscopic thing, so it's fantastic. You can disentangle behavioral mechanisms by manipulating conditions, and you have people behaving, you have data about people behavior. And if you calibrate your model with those kind of data, you can test, you can experiment, you can extend. It's like, you have an extensions of your lab in your computer. So very nice, I like that. And the ABM calibrated with experimental data can give you the possibility to explore something that is difficult, it's hard to explore in the lab. Multiple big scale interaction, multiple type of interaction, expanding time, space, scales of interaction. In the lab, impossible to do. Impossible to do, right? By the way, given the ethical constraints, now the ethics committee are so concerned about the ethical treatment of people, so that you might also not deceive people. So, whereas adding deception in the lab is sometimes now is prohibited for many. Typically, what the problem is, right? If you cheat people, if you defect people in experiment number 1, and they recognize that they were deceived in the rules, they will never trust the experimental instruction at experiment number 2. So, given that we create this kind of panel of experimental sample in the lab, deception can destroy the credibility of the experimenters. And so now everybody are very much sensitive about this kind of thing because there's a strong cause about destroying the quality of your experimental panel, your panel sample, right? These people in your model, they don't complain, they don't have any ethical, so you can cheat you can do whatever you want. So that's another beauty of this. By performing with these scenarios, you might also explore some boundary conditions, right? What can happen in the patterns that you observe in your data if certain kind of condition will be different, and those kind of differences are very difficult to empirically test. You can also explore boundary conditions about unrealistic type of conditions that you can't really, that don't make any sense to people really, but could be meaningful to explore in a model. So that's a thing, right? So I believe in this the beauty of interaction. This is one of the probably specificities of the behavior lab is the integration between experiments and ABM. So that's very much intrinsic to our style. So this is the second one. Second paper is more recent, published. This paper starts from an empirical data set where I guess probably you know what peer review is, right? My nightmare. Reviewer number 2. Oh my God. So I'm extensively studying peer review for a number of reasons in the last 10 years probably. And I have a bunch of empirical work. So typically I collaborated with publishers and I assessed large-scale data set of manuscript submission systems. So I got a lot of data from, in this case, it was Elsevier data, a group of journals from Elsevier. And so I observed how people behave, what are the interaction between authors and referees, what referees do, what are referee sensitive, and we have data from manuscripts, data from referee reports, referee recommendation, editorial decision, this kind of stuff, right? And this is a paper that was published some years ago in National Communication in which we got access to a group of Elsevier journals. We shifted at the same time, there was a trial in a group of journals last year. They shifted from confidential peer review to open peer review in the same time. And so we put together those data. So confidential peer reviews means that manuscripts are anonymized, sent to a referee, group of referee. Referee screen those manuscripts and send back to the editor an opinion, a report and a recommendation. Oh, accept is a Nobel Prize paper, rejected is bullshit, right? But everyone is anonymous, so authors do not know the identity of reviewers, reviewers do not know the identity of authors. It's a blind confidential peer review. They shifted to open peer review. And the open peer review means specifically that to reviewers, they got the option to reveal their reports and got the option to sign, reveal their identity. So the reports were published together with the paper. The paper was published once accepted. And together with the paper, there was a report number 1, referee report number 2, and there was a text of the reports and the recommendation. And in some cases, reviewers were given the chance to reveal their identity or not. So report number 1, text of the report, recommendation, minor revision, reviewer, Flaminio Squazzoni. So we got this kind of data, we run this analysis, and we found some interesting puzzle things that probably does not surprise the behavioralists in the room. Also, common sense is quite good. So these are the rejection, major, minor, revision, acceptance. This is the recommendation. This is the open peer review. This is open peer review name not published. This is the distributional recommendation where for reviewers who decided to reveal their identity, what you observe? You observe a distribution which is more towards the acceptance and minor. So look at this. Very few people agree to reveal their name when they were suggesting to reject the manuscript. More people were accepting to reveal their identity when they were suggesting either minor revision or the acceptance of the paper. I know from your smiles that you already understand why, right? So it's like a signaling game, right? If I want to kill your paper, I don't want to reveal my identity, otherwise I can be retaliated in the future if I will be mentioned with you as a reviewer of my paper. Okay? If you suggest minor revisions or acceptance, I want to reveal me as those one helping you to get published, so that maybe in the future, if by chance we'll be matched in the different roles, you will be keen to remember my name and be more polite with my paper, right? It's a cooperation signaling games, right? And indeed, what we found was, put a number. If I give you percentage off on the total number of reviews of these journals under the open peer review trial, in percentage, how many reviewers, according to your opinion, agreed to sign the report? How many? From 0 to 100%, how many?
5%.
Jesus Christ, you're very much misanthropic.
It's based on my experience.
Very close. Only 8.1% of reviewers agreed to reveal their identity, and in most of the cases, when they were suggesting minor and acceptance. It seems that peer review could be, open peer review, transform peer review, a kind of signaling game, which could compromise the quality, the rigor of the methods, right? This was what we observed. So, and then now we have this kind of data, we have this kind of puzzle. What can happen to the quality of peer review in terms of not fairness, in terms of the quality of publication, the probability that a paper which deserves to be published is eventually published and not rejected, and the probability, so error number 1, false positive or negative, false positive, false negative, right? And the probability that a paper which deserves to be rejected is eventually rejected and not published, right? This kind of bias. What can happen if referees and authors' identity are revealed? And by the way, I don't know if you're familiar with the debate about open peer review, open science, but we're very close to it. There's a bunch of communities very much radical on endorsing open peer review. And if they were given the power, they would transform completely the system in totally transparent system in which all the identity, all the reports will be public, with identity revealed, because this is expected to transform the game of peer review in a civilized dialogue between individuals. Whereas the problem of the open peer review fan is that they believe that confidentiality is a way for giving power to reviewers to be gatekeepers, to, to kill other people, to suggest that to be cited in the paper, to increase their citation. Under the veil of anonymity, people are playing a reviewer role, which is very much not compensated. You know that people are reviewing for free, right? They are not compensated. So what are the reasons why people are spending time in reading your manuscript and hours of time reading and providing a report and helping the editor to decide? Oh, well, they could play a game of reputational game with the editors. So they submit as the authors, and so the editors remembers that this kind of guy was very good as a reviewer, and so match this kind of a guy as authors with reliable reviewers, treat the author well, because the author is also a nice reviewer, and so there's kind of reputational game with the editor, or because they are interested in the topic, but they want to check if they are cited. Do you want to influence the findings in a way? Do you want to avoid findings published that are against their previous findings? So there are all this kind of bunch of possible behavioral reasons why people are reviewing. But if you transform, but the open peer reviews, people believe that reviewers and editors are gatekeeper, abusing, making violence to the rights of people to get published. And so they believe that by making this kind of process transparent, they are avoiding that people have the power, the monopoly of power to decide, about their publication. On the other hand, the critics of open peer review believes that if you are going to make transparent that process, what are the chances that a junior researcher or PhD student tell the truth against a creepy bullshit paper by a Nobel Prize? Or by a full professor, which could be in the hiring committee of the postdoc position later. Or, even more, what happens if, in some cases, the open peer review is designed in such a way that the review reports are immediately published? So the paper is published. Once submitted, first screening, there's no problem. Once submitted and sent to reviewers, or sent to the community analysis team people reviewing, in the platform is already published as preprint. It's already there. And either design it so the editor is picking up reviewers, or the editor is sending to the pool of reviewer through the digital technology a request, and people volunteer to review the paper. In some journals, it's like that. It's a voluntary mechanism. Not, the editor is, again, an enemy against the right of people to be published, is a gatekeeper, and has to be eliminated. So the community is self-organizing peer review in such a way that the paper is published in the platform of the journal. Everybody knows that. Everybody can read the whole paper with the name of the author, everything, and volunteer themselves to review the paper. I am that. And so reviewer number one is me. When I fill my report and my recommendation, my report, my recommendation is immediately visible to anyone else. So the reviewer number two, if he or she has not already volunteered to review the paper, can see the review, the reports, and the name of the previous, of the review number one before deciding, or when reading the same paper. And the review number one is a Nobel Prize, who say that the paper is immediately published, or only with minor revision. And you're a PhD student, paper review number two, and you're reading a paper. You find problems, you find flaws, you find Jesus, but the review number one is a Nobel Prize. And he or she is telling Jesus, he typically, Nobel Prize is man. He is telling that this paper is fantastic. You read the paper and say, oh my God, this paper is not. Either you step back, and say, no. Or, it's very hard that a junior researcher takes the stand to say to a Nobel Prize that this paper is wrong, right? Could be someone cool, but that in any case has an influence, right? You might be so brave to tell the Nobel Prize that he didn't spot an error in the regression in the model. But, so what happens if this kind of, what happens if we transform peer review as kind of status signal game? So we create a model in which we hypothesize that these people got the power to transform immediately the system in a draconian, transparent system. And we run a simulation model in which we were measuring, assuming that each agent were scientists, population of scientists, got some resources. They had an expected quality depending on resources in the manuscript. They were submitting manuscript around a given number of quality, which reflected their resources. resources could be cumulated depending on publication. The more people were published, the more resources they had. We got a random probability that even people without much resources, they were producing brilliant manuscripts, like a PhD student working alone, discovering the love of everything. But typically, people with more resources were probably lab-based, laboratories were producing more manuscripts, right? So manuscripts got an intrinsic quality which reflected resources distribution, but they were not published depending on the intrinsic quality. They were published depending on the perceived quality by reference. Each agent was submitting a paper and at the same time reviewing a paper of someone else. And depending on the type of resources invested by the reviewers, or depending on their motivation, they could approximate the true quality of the manuscript by either overestimating the quality or underestimating the quality, depending on certain type of behavior manipulation that they were part of the model. And it was a draconian publish or perish model, a market in which if you got rejected, you lose. Scientists were losing all the resources invested in manuscript. It was draconian. There was no publication market with many journals. We assume a mega journal publishing all the paper for all the kind of assignments. If you got publisher perishable, if you were rejected, you were losing all the resources. It was very much draconian simplification, right? And what we manipulated was the type of motivations that people were sensitive to whenever casted as reviewers. We set up a system which was confidential peer review. The names of reviewers and authors were not revealed, so they did not know each other. And we assume, let's suppose that people of reference are all fair. They invest all the resources needed to discover the true value, the intrinsic value of the manuscript. And then we compare, for each simulation take, we have the ranking of manuscripts submitted to the journal by the intrinsic quality. And then we got the recommendation of reviewers, and we matched these kind of two rankings and say how much false positive, negative positive, how much bias was the final decision. We assumed the referees were all fair. We ran the simulation and said, no, referees are all unfair. They want to save money for them in order to, next time, to generate a high quality manuscript, and they just randomly give recommendation randomly, like reading the title, say, okay, Nobel Prize or Bush, right? Or we assume, let's suppose that given the fact that people are authors but also referees at the same time, right? As in the community, right? They were linking these two experiences. If published as authors, they were happy, wow. And they were reciprocating by being reliable as a referee. If they were rejected, they were pissed off, and they wanted that the next author were paying the bill of their previous rejection, right? So you assume the referees were adaptive, sensitive to the experience. But then we ran all the simulation with this kind of variation of the initial condition. The rest was equal. The only variation was the motivation of the referee's behavior, right? In the second scenario, we say, let's suppose that there is a dictator, like the European Commission, I'm joking, a dictator to say, okay, from now on, open peer review is mandatory for all the journals. I'm sorry, guys, no confidentiality anymore, gatekeepers, monopoly, invisible college. No. We want to be democratization of science. We want to everything be transparent, right? And so now we assume that people were knowing each other. Round number one, Flaminio is matched with one of you, right? And you rejected my paper. Now remember you. In given round, by chance, I'm your referees, and I remember that you were suggesting to reject my manuscript. Let's suppose that we are, okay, now it's not anymore the previous experience as authors, being published or not, to get the reaction of the referees. No, now people are playing strategic games with each other. Now remember that you were recommending rejection of my paper. In next rounds, I match with you, now I'm your reviewer. I remember that. And I react. If you were rejecting my paper, I will reject yours. If you were recommending to publish my paper, I will recommend to publish yours. Which is kind of way to reveal this kind of sensitivity signal that we found in that data on the open peer review trial. Let's suppose that, okay, first round, okay. But let's suppose that I remember you. You were rejecting my paper, but you are a Nobel Prize, and I'm a junior researcher. So we other status signals, so they were not only remember each other, how they were matched before, but they also estimated they compare themselves with the other person in terms of status. If low status people match with high status people, pay deference, and in any case, support, are more keen to support the paper regardless of their type of previous experience. If they were rejected by a previous referee, which is now their author with whom they are matched, and they have a more precious status, they reject the paper. So we are that kind. What happens? What can happen in an analysis of work? And what happens is tragic, obviously tragic. What is the number of people? Right? Is the referees a random? It's random, right? This is oh my gosh, referees are random. It depends from a random kind of thing. And people are not very liking to be exposed to random kind of experience, right? Random behavior of people, random standards. And so people are obsessed in the literature about these kind of things, that peer review is random. Depends from, and so it's not very solid, not very consistent. By the way, I have a paper with millions of data about not only us, just peer review nature, quality journals. We are running a lot of analysis about peer review. If you want to check my Google Scholar profiles, you find a lot of publication of peer review with empirical data, and we didn't find any trace of the fact that peer reviewers are random. Just to give you a little bit of reason for hope. There's too much emphasis about the broken peer review being broken. So we've always found a little bit, very much consistent type of thing. So it's not so dramatic like, right? But anyway, what in fact, if all this is confidential peer reviews, all the reviewers are reliable, the bias is just the bias of the noise that we made in their capacity of spotting the true quality of the manuscript. So it's just the range of these kind of parameters, and this range determines the range of the bias. So it's typically an artifact of this kind of thing. So, and typically, if all referees are reliable, biases, differences between the list of publications according to intrinsic quality and the list of publication according to the perceived quality referee is very much similar. If under confidentiality, people are just even only reciprocating their previous experience. I've been published before. Okay, I trust the system. I'm positive, and I will do my job as a referee. I've been rejected. I'm pissed off, and I will do a bad job as a referee next time. If people are even only sensitive to that, the patterns of bias very much approximate the bias by a random, completely random scenario. But what happens when you compare open peer review, where people are sensitive to this kind of direct interaction? Okay, this is the sensitivity of reciprocity in the confidential peer review. The amount of bias in the system dramatically increases whenever identity are revealed. Whenever instead of playing in direct reciprocity motives in which you cooperate with an authors in case you've been positively evaluated as author before, but you start to play strategic game direct type of thing. So you cooperate with people who have cooperated with you in the past, and you defect with people who have defected with you in the past. It's a direct type of thing. The bias escalates to more than 20% at the system level. And but if you look at the type of quality of publications, you see that confidential peer review is really much undermining the quality of the publication. If people are sensitive to this kind of status signals or are sensitive to this kind of reciprocity thing. So this can explain why people are not probably revealing their names when they are recommending rejection of paper. So this is a very much what I've learned from that. Okay, there's no such a thing in reality in which we have a draconian dictator deciding that open peer review will become mandatory tomorrow morning for all the journals. Isn't realistic, right? So our simulations are unrealistic. Although there is a tendency, a trend of open peer review scaling up is gaining consensus in many, many communities. Obviously, it's implemented in not such a draconian way as we have done in our model. Everything transparent, everything. There is, for instance, in most of the journals, there is an opting out scheme in which you can opt out from, signing the report, which protects you in case you want to reject or you're suggested to reject the paper. So there are different type of things. At the moment, there is no such a realistic scenario like the one that we implemented in the model. But the model told us provided some insight about what can happen if. And instead of running an experimental trial with journals, is just using a model to generate some insight that could inform our opinion about the current situation. By the way, although I'm one of the guys probably in our team, we put together data about peer review that nobody has. So it's really, our work on the data is probably one of the first examples of large-scale data set on peer review, having point-to-point data about manuscript, authors, reviewers, editorial decisions. These are typically all data which even publishers do not possess, do not own. I'm informed that the entities, the companies owning the data of the manuscripts are private companies with whom publishers like Elsevier, giants. Elsevier now has its own type of platform, but it's just some years ago. Typically, those kind of data, which are obviously treasured, right? Data about manuscript, referees, authors, editorial decision, only Elsevier has 2,239 journals, Elsevier. So there are thousands, 10,000 and thousands of journals. There are tons of data which are hidden in those kind of platforms, and which are owned by companies, which are even not, in some cases, publishers. So the publisher, when we got those data, the publisher got to sign a contract to get back the data of the journal from another company. Crazy, right? Crazy. And there's no way, I try to convince the European Commission, everyone, of the beauty to have a public infrastructure to share data, to make this, and there's no way to do that. No way to do that. So there's nobody with this kind of data. So even if I have the best data possible, there's always some missing parts. Give an example. Now we are working with Elsevier to integrate data set from manuscript submission system to ORCID and to the Scopus ID. In such a way that Flaminio Squazzoni has a Scopus ID, which is the same ID that the Flaminio Squazzoni has on the editorial manager. So that I can trace Flaminio Squazzoni as an author and as a reviewer or an editor or the author of the manuscript in that kind of journal. And so I can integrate those information in such a way that I can understand at the moment in time which Squazzoni was submitting to the paper to that journal, which was his impact factor, his number of publication, his publication score, so that I can estimate at that time the status or certain type of attributes, but it's very much impossible to do because Scopus is Elsevier. So Scopus, for instance, is not. Now ORCID is very much, it's probably the only identity which is traced by different type of, indeed if you submit a paper to probably editorial manager, scholar one, this kind of system, you are asked to align your identity to the ORCID, right? And so this is the idea that ORCID is becoming the only, probably emerging type of standardized way of tracking identity of the same person across different kinds of systems. It's a fucking mess. It's really a mess, right? So we will never have those data to run this kind of analysis. And we never have this kind of time to say what can happen if this kind of system is dominated, right? So this is a beauty of this. And just closer to the end, right? Okay, so ABI can be artificial surrogates of experiments. So it's how can we run a randomized trial control on the efficacy of open peer review, larger scale, across different publishers to estimate if really open peer review is improving the quality of the process? How can we run those experiments? It's impossible. There are journals running randomized trial control internally, reviewing it, and it's very important about a single journal. It's impossible. So if I can't convince Elsevier, Springer Nature, Wiley, and Sage, and Taylor Francis to match their data, I cannot convince to run an across-journal, across-publisher randomized trial control to estimate the efficacy of open peer review. It's impossible. So this is the idea. We have ABI can be a surrogate when the experiments are impossible to be run. What can we do? We can do nothing. We can make our opinions. We can try to formalize models to try to inform our opinion by some type of evidence we generate. I stop here in the sense that the third example is part of the Francesco next lecture, which is the main author of this paper, which is still under review. So it's a novelty. And in that case, first example was integrating ABM with experimental data. Second case was using ABM to try to explore scenarios in which data are missing, informed by previous empirical research about open peer review. this is another example. This is incorporating ABM with network science, with network models, in which what the Francesco's idea was to take a very conventional, very solid type of network models, which were fit against a empirical data set about an advanced network, which is the Lazaga data set about the law firm company in which Lazaga has traced the advanced ties between these professionals. And these people were, these are the people, Tom Schneider and Stiglitz, they were using an inference-based simulation technique to try to infer the emergent network formations according to that kind of data set. But they made assumptions, we were contesting a little bit, but they make assumptions about that in the model, including full information about the network of all these kind of advisors, and very draconian and very computational demanding decision of each one of the nodes of the network to decide whether to bring or create links with anyone else, with a very strong demanding cognitive activities of agents, as if agents were not only have full information about the connection of anyone else in the system, that were computationally so to solve a very complex procedures to decide whether or not to create or maintain a link with anyone else. It was very much demanding. We're relaxing a couple of those assumptions and rerunning the same model, rerunning an ABM model version of this kind of model, and we were proving that we could fit the same Lazaga network matrix as was fit by this model by completely different assumptions. So again, we were exploring multiple paths of generation between the micro assumption of network formation rules and the meso and the macro outcomes of this kind of network by exploring different type of assumptions compared to another model, and we're fitting the same type of data with the same type of degree, right? So this will be Francesco's lecture, so I will skip that, and I will go to the end. So, I don't know if I convinced you or stimulating you in the interest of ABM, but anyway, in my opinion, ABM it can be a kind of old school. You start with we have to run a hypothesis about how agent behave, so it's a hypothesis driven in most of the cases. We don't have all the data that we would like to have to calibrate all the parameters of a very complex agent models in which there are heterogeneous agents, there are complex type of interaction structures, and so we have to make hypotheses about this kind of thing. It's a way but it's nice when it's related to existing type of research, empirical research, because in that kind of case, when you calibrate a model with some empirical data, you might exploit the capacity of the flexibility and the capacity of ABM to support counterfactual what-if scenario manipulation that is very difficult to support in other type of methods. As Francesco will explore, fitting every model which fits empirical distribution, empirical data, it's important, it's fantastic, but we only have to think the models are very full of assumptions. For instance, also the model that Francesco will summarize about Schneider's and Stiglitz type of model is full of hidden assumptions. And it's good to point different models to the same type of data, to have a many model type of estimates. And it's good to explore. ABM is very good to explore different type of possible micro mechanisms, right? It's very difficult to do in other type of thing. It's a way to putting behavioral social science at the core, because at some point you have to have your assumptions about agent behavior. Agent behavior is typically a social science type of thing, right? Behind all these kind of networks that we observe in our data, there are rules. Why people are interacting in a certain way, why people are preferentially attaching to a given type of node. Why are people maintaining some links and destroying others? Which are the rules that makes this kind of network formation that we observe? Which are the rules, not only the dynamics of the network, but the rules, the formation rules. These require assumptions about how people relate with each other, scan their social space, manage their links. So it's really something behavioral that has to be put at the core of our analysis. Okay, so I guess I've done so much, and I hope not to kill you, but coffee is probably around sometimes. And thank you for your attention.